You should be sending trade offers for these players in your fantasy football leagues to stack your roster for the playoffs that are coming up very quickly. Let's start with Devonte Adams, who over the first couple weeks with the New York Jets has not been impressive. And the Jets as a team obviously are not impressive also. Losing to the Patriots is not a very impressive feat. However, Devonte, 9 points this last week compared to 6 points the week before. He did have less targets, but he caught more of them, had more yards. And the thing with Devonte Adams is he's on a new team, in a new offense, and in my opinion, you can get him dirt cheap right now. My guess is you're going to see a lot of people move Devonte Adams so far down their rankings this week because if there's anything that the fantasy football community does very, very well, it's overcorrect. And so they're going to move Devonte Adams so far down because they're going to be so low on the situation with the Jets that you're going to be able to get him for very cheap. At this point, Devonte Adams might be going for close to flex prices. I don't think there's anybody that is coming out and saying that they're excited about the situation for Devonte Adams. Garrett Wilson has been outproducing Devonte Adams, which a lot of people tried to tell us would happen, and we said it wouldn't, and so far, we were wrong.
Now, it hasn't been pretty for Garrett Wilson.
It hasn't, but today, still 5 receptions, 113 yards, so still producing without a touchdown. He's still a top 12 wide receiver. And I don't expect, I do think they both can produce, right? I just think that as we get further along into his tenure with the Jets, I think that Devonte Adams is going to get better and maintain some of his chemistry with Aaron Rodgers. And again, if you can't get Devonte Adams cheap, I'm not trading for him because the situation is too bad. You're buying into a 31-year-old wide receiver on a bad offense. And a lot of people are maybe coming out and saying Aaron Rodgers is washed. I'm not saying that. A lot of people are saying that. The Jets certainly are not the team that we thought they were going to be coming into the season. But I think a lot of people are going to go ahead and run with the narrative that Garrett Wilson is going to dominate Devonte Adams in terms of fantasy production for the rest of the season, and that Devonte Adams is basically going to be the wide receiver 2, the second option on an offense that's been very poor. And I would send some offers for Devonte Adams this week. Okay, if you can send flex level running backs that aren't talented, that are in, or the running backs also in bad situations that you have to flex every week, like any of the Jaguars backs, and get Devonte Adams. In situations like this, I'm comfortable with it because I do think Devonte Adams, when it comes time for playoff time, playing Jacksonville in week 15, playing the Rams in week 16, playing Miami week 14, and then week 17 against Buffalo. I think there are going to be some solid matchups for Devonte Adams there. So when you're looking ahead to the playoffs, he is somebody that if you buy him now, his return on what he's going to give you from a production standpoint in the playoffs might very well be worth the price that you're paying for Devonte Adams right now. And so I know it could be better right now for Devonte. Only 7 catches through the first 3 games. But do keep in mind, he played Pittsburgh and he played New England. And, Pittsburgh's defense, obviously, we know their strong suit's not their secondary, and neither is New England this year. New England's defense, honestly, has been worse. But these are 2 teams that historically, they both do have 2 defensive-minded head coaches. And they both historically do have pretty tough defenses. So I'm not going to overreact. Houston, Arizona, and Indianapolis should give him a couple games to get his feet under him as a Jet. He should produce a little bit more. My guess is going into the bye week, his price is higher than it is now. So I would go ahead and buy him, get him on your team for the playoffs. Hopefully you can flex Devonte Adams. If you can flex Devonte Adams on a playoff team, my guess is going to look pretty good here in about 7 weeks. So
yeah, I think it'll look really good if you go ahead and just get to DK Metcalf right now while he's still out with that MCL sprain. Yes, there's obviously risk of him coming back and not being the same as he was pre-injury. But again, at this point, there have been so many injuries that have gone on in the NFL that I think you can kind of bet on DK Metcalf coming back and being okay. Because if there's one thing that we know about DK, it's that he gets banged up for a couple of weeks every single year, misses random weeks every once in a while. He actually ended up being like a game time decision this week. Almost they considered playing him, and he ended up not playing. So expect him to be back sooner rather than later, and I would go and try to get him now at a little bit of a discount before he starts going off again, because when you're looking at the last couple of weeks before the injury, obviously against Atlanta before we went down, he had 19 points in PPR formats. The weeks before that, he had 7.8 and 7.5 points. Very disappointing, honestly. He's only had 4 of the 7 weeks this week have been really good. He's been very boom bust, classic DK Metcalf, right? But when you're looking at his overall points per game this year, he is 16th in the league with 15 points per game. And I mean, that's better than almost every single year dating back to his second year where he had 17 points per game. So he's on a good stretch here. And when you were looking at the Seattle Seahawks offense against Buffalo this week without DK, They really were a completely different offense. They lost an entire dimension with DK's deep threat ability. Yes, JSN was the lead wide receiver there, but it didn't really matter because there wasn't a huge explosive nature to their offense. Kenneth Walker was not nearly as effective as he normally is because they were able to stack the box more. They didn't have to worry about guys like DK with his big playability. Kenneth Walker only had like 8 points on 9 carries. Charbonnet outproduced him, had the touchdown. I mean, everyone took a hit in that offense overall. They need DK Metcalf to be the best well-oiled machine that they can be, and that does include getting him the ball and getting him some big play touches. So with DK, you know exactly what he's going to do. He's a very safe asset when you do own him. He's going to have some boom-bust weeks, sure, but it's definitely worth it when you're looking to win your leagues from an upside perspective. Upside's the name of the game in fantasy football, and when he can drop 25 any given week, I think you got to buy the discount while you can.
Let's talk about Amari Cooper. So he only saw a slight increase in his snaps this week. We expected a lot bigger increase. We expected, a bigger workload than 5 targets this week, and actually he decreased in targets.
Yeah,
only had 2 targets this week. Only had 1 catch for 3 yards. He had 1 point in full point PPR fantasy football leagues. And so, looking at Amari Cooper, he was rotated out a lot in the fourth quarter. He wasn't playing a lot. Honestly, this one's a little bit tough. You're basically betting that he is going to be put in the rotation more. And now you have Keon Coleman, and then maybe this is coincidental, maybe it's not, but you have Keon Coleman actually starting to make some fantasy noise now. Khalil Shakir continues to make some plays and scored a pretty consistent fantasy clip. I know Keon had about 20 points today. Khalil Shakir also had 19 and a half points.
The Shakir showing was very surprising to me because it's just...
10 targets, 9 receptions, 107 yards.
Yeah, very, very out of character for what he normally does.
And then you also had, of course, I played Kincaid in the Flock League against him. So, of course, he had his best game of the season, 13.1 points, 7 targets, 4 receptions. And so with Cooper, I think if you're going to buy Cooper, you are betting that his playing time is going to increase because that really is what it's going to take here. When you're looking at the snaps, Keon Coleman, 63 snaps, Khalil Shakir, 44 snaps, Amari Cooper, 38 snaps. Only 24 routes run, which is only 4 less than Keon Coleman and 5 less than Khalil Shakir. So in terms of the routes run, obviously you've got Keon Coleman and Khalil Shakir coming in probably for 12 personnel, things like that. Mm-hmm. But the targets are really what's alarming. You've got both of those guys getting 7 and 9 targets respectively, and then Amari Cooper getting 2 targets. Even Dalton Kincaid had 7 targets today. James Cook had 3 targets, and so
I think there are a lot of aspects of this game that just made it kind of a weird one for Amari Cooper coming into a new offense, right? His second week. James Cook drops 2 touchdowns. He hasn't dropped multiple touchdowns since his big week, I think, against the Dolphins earlier in the season. And when that happened, no one was super productive in that offense as a whole outside of him. He goes off. Shakir happens to go off. Keon Coleman happens to be productive, and Dalton Kincaid. All 4 of those guys were productive, and Amari Cooper just happened to be the odd man out. I would expect Khalil Shakir not to get 10 targets every single week when you look at the full volume that he or the full workload that he gets consistently the whole season, anywhere from like 3 to 7 targets. So yeah, I don't know. I think Amari still has the highest upside there out of anyone outside of James
I think
Cook.
he does too. And again, he played 56% of the snaps through the first 3 quarters. Do keep in mind this wasn't really a close game, so we weren't really rotating him in the fourth quarter. But again, with Cooper, he still only played 50% of snaps today total. And when he was on the Browns, he was playing, 80, 85, 90% of the snaps. Yeah. I really don't think this is going to be a long-term thing for Cooper. My guess is he's going to start playing a little bit more as the season goes on. It did go up, like I said, about 10, 15% from last week's showing. So if Cooper does get on the field more, the targets are going to go up as well. And obviously we saw last week he does have touchdown upside. In an offense that has looked better, in my opinion, than I thought they would this year. I honestly expected them to disappoint, and they haven't. So I think Cooper can come back and be a fantasy football force because we know the level player Amari Cooper is. Yeah, he wasn't good in Cleveland. A lot of people like to point to that. But the thing about that was he was literally playing with what we now know is probably the worst quarterback in the NFL, Deshaun Watson. Seeing Jameis after Deshaun Watson
just absolutely
was it was mind-boggling. So Cooper's still a wide receiver 3 this season. So we'll see. I think that if he does come back, you're going to see an increase in targets. You're basically betting if you're buying him that he's going to see an increased workload. I don't think it's a terrible bet, so we're going to put him on the buys list this week. Yeah.
We also are going to put DeAndre Hopkins on this buys video because very similar reasons as Amari Cooper. With D-Hop, there was like an announcement that came out pretty soon before the game started where they were like, DeAndre Hopkins is going to get a decent amount of work, and he really just didn't. Like, I don't know why that report came out or if like the Chiefs lied about it or what, but I mean, they just didn't utilize him that much. A lot of it had to probably be because of Travis Kelce and Patrick Mahomes wanting to absolutely light up the Vegas Raiders, which they did. Travis Kelce kind of had his coming out party this year, had 12 targets, 10 receptions, 90 yards, a touchdown, dropped 25 points, which I think a lot of owners of Travis Kelce were happy to see that. And then you had Xavier Worthy hauling in a touchdown as well, and 8 targets, which is very out of character for him. With DeAndre Hopkins, I would expect DeAndre Hopkins to operate exactly how we thought he would operate heading into this offense after a couple of weeks of being implemented into this new situation, and that is be that possession wide receiver who's very reliable, that they can give the ball to and target him on crucial third downs, because he's got incredible hands. He still has some of the best hands in the league. He's D-Hop, even though he's 31, 32, he still is very, very reliable. And there's a reason the Chiefs traded for him, obviously, and that's not to give him 3 targets a game. So you've got, obviously, outside of Xavier Worthy and Travis Kelce, not anyone else that's super consistent. D-Hop, I think, is going to be that consistent force from here on out. Just be a little patient with him. If you're an owner of D-Hop, you don't have to start him next week if you're uncomfortable. Heck, you don't have to start him for a couple of weeks if you're uncomfortable while he eases into this workload. We just saw this with the Amari Cooper situation in Buffalo. It's going to take a little bit of time for him to learn an entirely different offense, and that's okay. I mean, at this point, we're more than halfway through the season, and we're starting to look at a playoff push. And when push comes to shove and we're getting into the playoffs, D-Hop's going to be a really reliable playoff flex option for you pretty consistently. I'd be willing to bet on that for sure. And with him, I think if you can afford it, man, you can get him at a pretty affordable discount right now in a decent situation where they're starting to utilize Mahomes a little bit more because they just need to be more explosive as an offense in the passing game. And he threw the ball 38 times today, which that's
a lot for Mahomes as of recent.
Right. He did that against Atlanta and New Orleans as well.
Yep.
Other games, it was less than 30 every single time. Look, I think this is going to be what the Chiefs are going to have to do kind of down the stretch here is throw the ball a little bit more. Kareem Hunt was still productive. D-Hop, I think, is going to reap the benefits, and Travis Kelce. So, and
he actually threw for a passing touchdown today, which was the first time Mahomes has done that in October.
Right.
So there's also that fun statistic. But let's talk about Keenan Allen.
And he threw for 2.
Yeah, he did. The Bears offense, I do think it continues to look better. But we did mention, of course, and what people didn't really want to acknowledge is before the bye week, they played Jacksonville and Carolina. And so those two teams kind of inflated, I think, just how good the Bears offense actually is. They're definitely not an elite offense yet. And Caleb Williams does continue to get better. But Keenan Allen, in this stretch against Carolina, he played 80% of snaps. He only had 6 targets, but he had 6 points. Same thing against Jacksonville, but he had 2 touchdowns, so he had 21 points. And then back to 6 points again this week, but 7 targets, which is the most he's gotten since week 1 against Tennessee. He only caught 2 of those targets for 39 yards. And part of this is if you were watching that game, obviously you know that, number one, the Bears could not get anything. And I mean, they could not get anything going against that Commanders defense, primarily because the Commanders were getting to Caleb Williams at a very high rate. Caleb Williams was not comfortable out. I mean, Caleb, obviously he was escaping pressure, but still not really finding open guys. The Commanders defense is just solid. And then obviously they have Dan Quinn as their head coach. I think that's something that we maybe should have seen coming. And also you've seen the Cowboys defense get significantly worse without Dan Quinn.
Which is very funny. Though, I kind of feel bad for Mike Zimmer, not going to lie.
Yeah. But a lot of people are going to take this performance from Keenan Allen, where he underperformed, and say, yeah, Keenan Allen, and did Rome do anything today? Did Rome play? Yeah, so Rome had 8 points. He had 1 less target, 1 more reception. So he had 8 points. And then you obviously have DJ Moore. But again, I want to stress all of these guys. DJ Moore also had 5 points. All of these guys pretty much did nothing today because that offense pretty much did nothing today.
Yeah,
I mean, they were really...
Swift was saved by a big breakaway touchdown.
Exactly.
That was the only reason.
And outside of that, for the Bears, that offense was not fantasy productive today. Caleb Williams had 9 points. You had Swift with 18, Odunze 8, Allen 6, Moore 6, Kmet 4, Everett 1. It was an ugly game. And so I do expect Keenan Allen, as he's continued to get healthier, because he has had some injury issues, which, I mean, everybody said, Keenan Allen is slow and fat coming into the season, and they were partially correct about that. But again, like some of the other guys on this list, because a lot of these guys are old wide receivers, I think you can get Keenan Allen super cheap right now. And I think he's a really good depth option with also some high upside because he is going to get a lot of red zone targets in that offense. Yeah. And you are going to have the Chicago Bears when they go into playoff mode. They're going to face Minnesota in week 15, Detroit in week 16. Obviously, Detroit has a very good secondary. Minnesota does give up a ton of points to fantasy wide receivers. And that's because the strength of their defense early in the season has been the run defense, but their secondary has not been great. Detroit is a tough matchup within Seattle, but what you know about the Minnesota, Detroit, and Seattle games is all of them are going to be very high-scoring games, and so they are going to be slinging it. They are going to have to be throwing the ball, and so I think he could end up being a good guy to have on your team come playoff time. But Keenan, again, I think a lot of people would say, very disappointing this season. That game ended up being kind of a rock fight. Anybody who watched it knew it. They did nothing in the second half. They really didn't do anything until, again, that Swift touchdown. And Keenan Allen was getting targets. They just were not the highest quality of targets due to the fact that Caleb Williams was finding himself under pressure in that game a whole lot. So I think once you have games against, for example, next week, Arizona, coming up when they do play Minnesota and Detroit before the playoffs, I think, they play Minnesota, Detroit, San Francisco, Minnesota, and Detroit. So they play the next in a 5-game stretch, they play those guys twice. It's freaking nuts.
Yeah.
But again, they're going to be high-scoring games. And so with Keenan, I do think that Caleb Williams is going to rely on his veteran wide receiver still. I think you're going to see DJ Moore be the wide receiver one there. I think Rome Odunze is going to occasionally have big plays and make him productive. But you are buying into an offense that does look better, a passing game that does look better, and into a veteran that if he does stay healthy, I think he's going to continue to get a lot of targets, run a lot of routes, and have high touchdown upside because he does get red zone targets as well. And he did have red zone targets today as well. So Keenan Allen, again, somebody I think you can go get really cheap right now in fantasy football.
Yeah, I also think that David Njoku is kind of flying under the radar just a little bit. And I know a lot of people are going to say you're an idiot because he's had 2 straight really good weeks. The reason he's going to fly under the radar is because Cedric Tillman is going to be all the rage this week. Cedric Tillman is going to be the hottest waiver pickup by far. He has gone absolutely nuclear like 2 straight weeks now. And he is looking to potentially be Jameis Winston's top option. And that actually means something because Jameis Winston just made 3 wide receivers relevant in the Cleveland Browns offense. Expect that to be the norm. Cedric Tillman dropped 29 points off of 9 targets, 7 receptions, 99 yards, and 2 touchdowns today. Elijah Moore had another 16 points. Jerry Jeudy had 12 points. And David Njoku had 17 points. This is the Jameis Winston experience. He's going to throw some picks. He is going to be one of the best fantasy-friendly assets that you could ever ask for. Not him specifically, but what he does for the rest of that offense and those receiving assets. David Njoku is no exception here. And the reason I want to focus on David Njoku, like I said, Cedric Tillman is going to be all the rage. People are going to say that Jerry Jeudy is a sneaky buy, which I don't necessarily disagree with. Elijah Moore is going to be a sneaky waiver pickup if he is still available on waivers as well. David Njoku, the tight end position overall right now is pretty disgusting. Now, National Tight End Day, all the tight ends decided to go off at the same time, right? That kind of is a reason that Njoku is flying under the radar right now because McBride had a great week. Otten went off. Kyle Pitts went off. Kelsey went off. Njoku at this point on the week ended up being like the 8th or 9th most productive tight end with 17 points. I don't think anyone's really going to notice this. He had 14 targets last week against Cincinnati. A lot of those targets came after Deshaun Watson went down with injury. And then against the Baltimore Ravens defense and all of that production for all those receivers, 7 targets. He got a red zone target, hauled in a touchdown, 17 points. Like this to me is a really, really easy buy. If you're streaming tight end right now and you want to get a little more of a reliable option, David Njoku is perfect for that. And he is perfect for this offensive system now. Everyone seems to benefit, go figure, when Deshaun Watson is not on the field. So go take advantage of this, please, because after National Tight Ends Day, I think we're going to get a little bit regression back to what we've seen with how bad the landscape of tight ends have been. And I think Njoku is going to remain consistent while some other guys fall off a little bit.
And then let's wrap it up here with another tight end, TJ Hockinson, who I would expect to play next week. And what you've seen since TJ Hockinson has been out, obviously they
officially activated him, actually.
Yeah. So he was questionable.
53-man.
He was questionable this week and then just didn't play. So I think he's going to come back.
Yep.
What you've seen is actually Johnny Munt, of all players, has gotten like 2 to 5 targets a game.
Oliver's been getting production.
Oliver.
As well.
So like the tight ends in that offense,
they want to use them.
They do, and the same thing, 1 to 2 targets a game. So it's a total of combined like 5-6 targets a game for the tight ends in that offense. One of the most impressive things about Sam Darnold and the Vikings offense this season is that Sam Darnold, when you look at his, like, I'll get on and check the scoring plays if I'm not watching the Vikings game specifically, and it will be Sam Darnold throws a touchdown to Oliver, which has happened. He throws one to Trent Sherfield,
a fullback,
Brandon Powell, a fullback. That offense is such a well-oiled machine and also so dynamic that he can throw touchdowns anywhere. But when you see TJ Hockinson come back, we forget how good of a tight end TJ Hockinson is. We do. We forget because we have, I don't even know the word. We cannot see past right now.
Tunnel vision.
Tunnel vision. Thank you. We have tunnel vision. And we don't remember that TJ Hockinson, when he was on the field last year, was the tight end 1 or 2.
He was going to be the tight end 1 if he finished the season fully healthy.
Through the first, he played almost all of his games last year, but listen to his targets: 9, 8, 11, 8, 8, 12, 9, 12, 15. This is, guys. So when TJ comes back, I would expect, if anybody's going to be hurt from this, it's going to be, first of all, the random guys, I think, between the 20s especially. But it would be Jordan Addison if you had to pick a high name guy. Yeah. Jordan Addison he didn't get his points last year from getting high target volume because he didn't really have that many targets last year. He got his production from touchdowns. Yeah. He had last year 108 targets. For a guy who was a wide receiver 2, he had 108 targets. It's really not that much. He had 10 touchdowns last year. Again, he hasn't really been targeted a lot so far this year because they spread the ball around so well. But when TJ Hockinson does come back, you're going to see those targets become a little bit more concentrated. You're going to see, think for example, a better version of the Raiders offense where you see Jacoby Myers and Brock Bowers get the large majority of those targets. Yeah. That's what you're going to see with TJ Hockinson and Justin Jefferson.
Yeah, a couple big things too with Hawk coming back. Obviously, you're going to say, well, he's going to be eased in potentially. Yes, that is possible. One thing I would keep in mind is that even on a snap count, TJ Hockinson against the Indianapolis Colts is a must start in my opinion. Number 2, the Darisaw injury. That's one of the better left tackles in the league for the Minnesota Vikings. He went down on a season-ending, I think, ACL tear. He's on IR, and if you saw what the Vikings offense looked like before and after he went down, it was like night and day, and Sam Darnold was flustered big time. They win that game if Darisaw doesn't go down. So literally Hockinson could not have come back at a better time. He is by far the easiest, quickest, hot read for Sam Darnold to get the ball to while he's under pressure, because he is the tight end that's the short to intermediate target who has really, really good yak ability. So keep that in mind. The Darisaw injury can hurt a lot of the overall offensive operation in Minnesota, but I think it's really going to benefit TJ Hockinson.
And a lot of people will say, oh, well, his yak's not going to be there because he's coming off an ACL. It doesn't have to be there. If the dude gets 6 targets a game, he's going to be a tight end. He's going to be a top 12 tight end rest of the season.
Yes.
Easily. Like that. It's a combination of, A, he can just be that target that catches the ball and falls down and he's good. Yeah. But B, the tight end landscape is so bad right now. So, although it was better today because it was National Tight End Day. So there you go. Some players to buy low on your fantasy football teams. That's all we've got for you. Make sure you drop a like and subscribe if you appreciate the video and help support. Appreciate you guys. We'll see you later.